Hello. Since buying Twiggy, I've had a few people say in the comments, "Oh, that boat really is too small for you, you need something bigger." So I've decided to try something fractionally bigger.
This is the P&O cruise ship Azura, capacity just over 3,000 passengers and about 1,500 crew.
And before I get further comments from people saying, "Oh, you're not going to start turning this into a cruise ship channel, are you?" No, fear not. I'm just doing a week's holiday. And before I came out, I asked my patrons if they would be interested in a cruise ship vlog. And of those people who answered, they were overwhelmingly positive. So here it is. If you don't like it, there'll be normal content resuming fairly soon.
Built in 2010, Azura measures 290 metres long, weighs 115,000 tonnes and has 14 guest decks, comprising over 1,500 cabins. It's got 4 swimming pools, 6 whirlpool spas, a theatre, an open-air cinema and 9 restaurants. To my mind, somewhat unbelievably, this is classed as a small cruise ship. Having never been on a cruise before, but having watched many cruise videos on YouTube, I had a general idea of what to expect, but at the same time, no idea if I was going to enjoy it. Would I be seasick? Would everyone on board be carrying the norovirus? Was it going to be like the Poseidon Adventure, a film that's traumatised me about ocean going since I saw it as a child? There was only one way to find out. This particular cruise is organised as a fly cruise. In other words, you fly out to Tenerife on an airplane chartered for the purpose by P&O. I do like that they offer a variety of regional airports to go from, so for 50 quid extra I was able to choose Birmingham instead of having to trek down to Gatwick or Heathrow, which would have ended up costing me much more than this. I booked car parking for the week through the airport website. That cost 60 quid, and that was actually lucky because when I first looked at the prices it was around 100. I don't know what happened, but I thought 60 was decent, and that was in car park 5, which meant a short walk to the terminal. After de-icing the plane's wings twice, which delayed us, we took off on the 4-hour flight, during which time the airline, Jet2, tried to persuade us at every turn to part with our money on food, alcohol and perfumes. Whilst the seat legroom was okay, the seat itself was rock solid. I have never been so uncomfortable, but I managed to mostly sleep, although I did get chatting at the start to 2 lovely women, friends travelling together who'd cruised many times before, and were very happy to give me advice and tips. And this was actually a theme throughout the holiday, as I will talk about later. Anyway, the flight landed, and with the help of numerous P&O reps holding placards, we were shuffled towards waiting coaches, which then took us 45 minutes across the island to the port of Santa Cruz, where the ship was docked. We had our luggage security scanned, our boarding passes checked, and then we were required to go to our muster station, really just so that we'd know where it was. There wasn't a safety briefing there. You just check in at the muster point and then go on to watch a safety video in your room. Speaking of my room, I was travelling solo and had booked a solo inside cabin for reasons of economy. Even so, as a solo traveller, I paid about 50% more than someone would have when going as a couple. My basic holiday fare was £799 for the week, including the standard airfare, but plus the extra 50 quid to go from Birmingham. That fee covers the cabin on the boat, the basic dining options for breakfast, lunch and dinner, plus snacks and a nearly all-day buffet, as well as tea and coffee at meals. You also get access to the pools, the entertainments, the bars and so on. It's actually good value, but it's still great to pay extra going solo when you're in a solo room. Other fees I paid were that parking at the airport, an upgrade to include cruise cover on my annual holiday insurance, and I paid for any drinks as I went, because I rarely drink alcohol, and for me it wasn't even worth buying P&O's soft drinks package at £10 a day. I just don't drink that much Pepsi. I worked out when I got back that the entire holiday, including a small amount of spending money, seasickness pills, food at the airport and so on, came to a grand total of just over £1,000. Back to my room, which was surprisingly spacious. I genuinely imagined a solo cabin would be something like a Japanese capsule hotel, but it was great. The bed was about 4 feet wide, which is a standard narrowboat bed width, so that was very familiar. there was a ridiculous amount of storage in the room. I've never seen so many cupboards and shelves and nooks and crannies. You could not possibly bring enough suitcases to fill up all the space. A large table was across the back with 2 UK power sockets and, crucially, a kettle with tea bags and milk sachets. A large hanging area was to the right of that, and more cupboards again, with the shower room to the side of that. That area was decent sized too, with a toilet and sink, towels. It was all very clean and tidy, and maintained as such every day by the cabin steward, although I travel very light really, so there's not much to be tidied. The shower was great in terms of water pressure and temperature. I couldn't stop myself having a navy shower to save water though, just habit from the narrowboat. I still do that at home too. And yes, it was a shower curtain rather than a solid screen, which I believe some folk don't like, but it didn't try to stick to me as I showered, so I had no issues with it, apart from the one time I didn't quite pull it into the shower tray properly and turned the rest of the room into a swimming pool. So all in all, I was very impressed by the solo cabin. Yes, there was no window, again because I'd paid the most basic fare, but I didn't feel that it was necessary because I only really used the room for sleeping or napping. As with most cruises, as I understand it, the fare included main meals at the so-called MDRs, the main dining rooms. These were rather handily on the same floor as my cabin and just a few steps away. The other option was the buffet, but that was at the other end of the ship and several floors up, so mostly I went to the MDR, not least because I like being waited on when I'm on holiday. Most of the tables were set for 6 or 8 people, with a scattering of 2-person tables. If I'd insisted on having my own table, I'd generally have had to wait a while, as these were relatively scarce at peak times. But if I was willing to share, which I had decided in advance that I was going to make myself, then I got in almost immediately every time and had very pleasant chats with all kinds of people on the ship, mostly about how we were enjoying the cruise and what we were hoping to do and so on. The food I thought was very good. Now, bear in mind, I'm not someone who likes posh food. I'm a plain and simple fella, and that's mostly what we got, which suited me down to the ground. And yes, I did occasionally make up cheese sandwiches in the buffet. Breakfast was things like toast, cereal, pancakes, fruit. You could have the cooked traditional English breakfast too, things like sausage, beans, eggs and so on. And all of that came with tea and coffee and fruit juice, although my first criticism was that the juice was clearly very well watered down. It was not particularly nice. The lunch menus had a range of options, from sandwiches to cooked meals, always with dessert, and I must say, some very nice ice cream. I don't know what brand it was, but it was tasty. It did sometimes arrive a bit melted, unfortunately. The evening meal was again 3 courses, generally a bit of soup to start with, which I always found delicious, and then some meat or fish. They were incredibly stingy with the vegetables. I'd usually have about 5 times as much, but luckily the soup and then the dessert filled the whole. And the desserts were mostly lovely, including, as this is P&O, a British-themed cruise line, even if it's owned by an American company, a traditional British pudding each day, like steamed sponge or spotted dick and custard. And yes, overseas viewers, you did hear that name right. Google it. The only issue I had was the custard, like the fruit juice, was as thin as water, not good custard at all, which rather spoiled the pudding experience. The waiters were excellent. I've never seen so many people buzzing around a room. It was like ants in a colony carrying trays of food. It was truly the definition of organised chaos. Hats off to all of them. Elsewhere, the buffet had loads of food nearly all day long, and I did end up eating there for 2 evening meals because you had to be dressed up in black tie for those 2 particular days, and I don't even own a suit, let alone a tux, and I wasn't going to buy or rent one just for 2 days of a holiday. That said, I agree with what other reviewers have said about Azura's buffet. It's rather cramped and oddly laid out, so you are always bumping into people. And some of the items were a bit rubbery or tasteless, but there was enough choice to keep you going, so no real complaints from me here. I thought there was going to be a formal afternoon tea served on the sea days, but either I missed it or it didn't happen. However, there were always scones and tea to be had in the afternoon in the buffet. Outside at the pool you could get pizza slices, which were included in your holiday fare, with ice cream and optional extra. And there was another food area where you could get burgers and chips for free, although I only tried this once and the fries were so thin as to have no discernible potato in them whatsoever. It suffices to say I did not starve and didn't feel the need to pay extra for the speciality dining, especially since, as already mentioned, I don't tend to like posh food and I loathe anything even mildly spicy, so the very well regarded Sindhu Indian restaurant just wasn't on my to-do list. This is supposedly a small ship, so I was hoping to get my bearings after just a day or so. But by the end of the week, I was still turning the wrong way out of the lifts and trying to work out which way I was facing on the pool decks. I still can't quite work out why it was so hard to get to grips with. There were plenty of deck plans around, and I was never in any doubt about which deck I was on, just which way I was facing, and which deck each of the bars and events venues were on. My cabin was on Deck 6. It's alongside a casino and Brody's bar where there were quizzes and karaoke nights, but I was pleasantly surprised I couldn't hear any noise from the bar in my room. Also on that deck were the reception desk, stairs to the atrium, and one of the main dining rooms where I had my main meals. You could also get into the rather splendid Playhouse Theatre at the front of the ship. This was quite substantial and an excellent venue. I'll describe the entertainments here in a moment. One floor down was another dining room and an art gallery, plus a small library which I rather liked and made use of on a couple of occasions, and some shops with very overpriced P&O merchandise. I'd have bought some if it hadn't been such a rip-off. Plus there was a coffee bar which costs extra. Go one flight up from my deck and there was another entrance to the theatre, a specialty restaurant called the Glass House which featured a lot of wine. This was also the deck with most of the bars on it, one next to the atrium, then the Malabar, where there was often live music as well as some talks during the day. I went to a couple by the art gallery manager, one about great art thefts throughout history, which was very interesting. They had quizzes in this bar as well. If you keep walking along, you go past the Sindhu restaurant, and then at the back you get to the Manhattan Bar, which again had live music, comedy and other events. The next 6 decks up were guest cabins, and then you emerge onto the open decks at the top, which had various small swimming pools surrounded by sun loungers, a cinema screen, plus some poolside bars and grills, as already mentioned. It was here on Deck 15 that you find the buffet as well. I never had a problem finding somewhere to sit, and maybe because we didn't have great sunshine, no problems finding a sun lounger either, on occasions when I fancied a nap or a bit of reading. The pool right at the back of the ship was being refurbished for the first couple of days, so it was out of use, but they did finish painting and it was open again later on. Apart from this, the only other maintenance I noticed was this bucket underneath presumably a leak in the roof as I stepped aboard on day 1. I read a lot of comments and critiques from regular cruisers before I went, saying that Azura is outdated and tired, but if you'd never been on a cruise before, you probably wouldn't notice, and lo and behold, I didn't notice. It all looked fine to me, but I have nothing to compare it with. It certainly wasn't all bling and diamonds and gold, but I prefer a more muted, less ostentatious decor anyway. If it had been Las Vegas on sea, as I see some cruise ships appear to be, it would have hurt my brain. As I was travelling in December, the ship had been decorated with tinsel and lights and trees and so on, which was nice. I am a terrible holiday maker on my own. I wander around a bit and then never really know what to do with myself, so a cruise was a revelation, as there were things planned for every second of the day, albeit that I didn't necessarily want to do them all. Each night, a printed programme for the next day would be left by the cabin door. Terrible waste of paper, but I'm old school and preferred it over looking at it online. Incidentally, they don't do anything on an app on this ship other than you can check your bar tabs, so you don't really need a phone or tablet or anything. The activities included early morning gym sessions, which I certainly did not attend, deck games, cinema showings, various singers dotted around the venues, plus the main evening's entertainment in the theatre. We were firmly instructed not to film any of the shows, which is a shame, as I'd have liked to have shown some clips because they were really very good indeed. Much better than I'd imagined, although also a bit shorter than I'd expected. About 45 minutes long, presumably so they could get in 2 showings a night with a break between. Mostly song and dance numbers, the Headliners Theatre Company, who seemed to be the in-house group, did a phenomenal job with presumably not a huge amount of backstage space. Costumes were changed in seconds and each number had a different dance routine, and then they did a whole different show the next night. It was just good fun stuff. There was also a lovely Welsh singer who'd appeared on The Voice, and the final act before I left the ship was a really good folk and sea shanty group called the Privateers. Now, I nearly didn't go into this one because I thought, am I really going to enjoy folk and sea shanties? And I'm so pleased that I did see them because they were full of energy, fun, and at the same time entirely comfortable and relaxed on stage. They were, in short, excellent. Other than that, I went along to various quizzes in Brodie's and the Malabar, usually scoring on the mediocre level, but it was always good fun. I didn't sing on the karaoke night, though I am usually a shameless show-off at that kind of thing. Some of the people doing it clearly had aspirations of show business though, and I felt a bit put off. It wasn't shoddy enough for me to join in. So overall, it is a 10 out of 10 from me for the onboard entertainment. I do suspect if you'd been on bigger ships, you might have wanted more. We started in Tenerife, having landed on the Friday lunchtime, and also spent Saturday there, so I went for a wander around the port town. There was a small market on, and I pottered around generally, seeing lots of colourful murals on the buildings. There was a boat sculpture outside another market, which was too busy for me. I felt a bit squashed, so I left pretty sharpish. It was warm, about 22 Celsius, but the days were largely overcast, and on the Saturday afternoon in Tenerife, I had my first of several soakings as I walked back to the ship. Drenched I was. This was ostensibly a tour of 3 Canary Islands, but the ship also went to Madeira, 300 miles north, which meant day 2 on the boat was a sea day. I'd been rather concerned about this, as I wondered if I'd get seasick, but thankfully the sea was about as calm as you could hope for, both going and coming back, and although you knew the boat was moving, I was fine. Madeira started off well when I met a random cat, though in typical cat form it did not wish to say hello. Walking along the front there were statues, artworks, parks, boats, and a view of the hills which were shrouded in mist. I didn't take a trip on the famous cable cars as the queue was rather long, but I heard that those who did couldn't see anything from the top because of low clouds anyway. In town, Christmas was being marked with a market, and a brass band played. I wandered through a park back to the boat, and for the second time got absolutely soaked by a downpour. After another day at sea, we reached Gran Canaria, which I rather liked. I can't explain why, maybe it was just that it had a long stretch of beach. I had a lovely, slow stroll along this before getting, you guessed it, drenched in another deluge of rain, which thankfully was short-lived. This is clearly a hot spot for surfing, grand waves and loads of people falling off their boards. The final destination was Lanzarote, but I've been here before, and I heard it was a very long walk to the town from the port, and that the cruise ship's shuttle bus apparently only took people halfway, for reasons that I never discovered, so I stayed aboard that day, which at least had the benefit of me not getting rained on. It was on this day, as I sat on a sun lounger by the ship's pool, that a film was played on the open-air screen, which included the F word blaring out from one of the characters, followed closely by what would be a blasphemy if you are of Christian beliefs. Now, I'm totally blasé about everything, very open-minded, generally have my mind in the gutter anyway, so it didn't offend me as such. But I was very surprised that P&O would play a film with that language at 2:30 in the afternoon around the pool area. I even checked the programme schedule later, and the film was marked as R-rated for language, so they knew what they were showing. This I found a bit bizarre, and I keep meaning to write to them about it. As I have mentioned many times before, I am really rather introverted, despite my aforementioned and somewhat paradoxical love of karaoke. Striking up conversation with unknown people socially makes me squirm. Imagine my delight then to discover that everyone I sat next to, whether for meals or in the theatre or wherever, was absolutely lovely and friendly and happy to engage me in conversation, which once the ice is broken, I have no trouble enjoying. Admittedly, every conversation began with cruising because that was our common denominator, but it just made chatting with strangers much more straightforward. I didn't have that many interactions with the crew other than a brief hello to my cabin steward or to order my food in the dining rooms, but they too were friendly and seemingly unruffled by having to deal with so many people. So it was a good experience on the socialising front too, although I would say I was at the younger end of the age spectrum. Apart from a couple of 20-somethings who seemed to be there with bigger family groups, Most of the guests aboard were late 50s or more at least, including a hilarious pair of sisters in their mid-80s who had riotous tales to tell about their previous cruises. And a quick hello again and thank you to the 5 people aboard who came up to say they watched my videos and were very kind about them, which was so very, very nice. I was dubious about going on a cruise for the reasons mentioned at the start. But apart from YouTubers who rave about cruising, I also have a handful of friends who've recently begun holidaying aboard, and they've talked about it in glowing terms. A lot of people said it would be Butlins-on-Sea, although never having been to Butlins, that may be accurate and not a bad thing. I don't know. I'm sure a cruise is not for everyone, but I can say I'm now a convert to the cause, and I'm already looking to go to the Norwegian fjords, and quickly, before the Norwegians ban the cruise ships in 2025. So apologies to Norway for my impending visit. And I want to go around bits of the Med that I've never done before as well, and some river cruises too. I just need to find the finance. Cruising can be very costly, especially solo. Time to get on Tinder again. Cheerio!